and therefore you might have had issues with children. You're members of a church, you might be deacons in the church, you might be elders in the church, many of you work in various locations perhaps, and so this is where I want to get a little bit closer to home and share some case studies, some additional observations, and additional insights about how we can apply what we learned. But I'll also be interested in any challenges you are either currently confronting or have confronted in the past. Perhaps you work for a boss who's not leading you as effectively as he or she should. And I'll be happy to entertain those. And so we'll turn our attention to specific case studies that I've kind of gleaned from years of living, being a father, being a parent, being an elder, being a member of churches. So I've kind of been there and I've kind of seen when it works well. I've also, unfortunately, seen when it doesn't work so well. And so to get us underway, on page 22 in your materials, there's, again, a series of case studies. There are 7 of these. It goes on to page 28. And I'm going to have you just go ahead and, as we did with the biblical case studies, I'd like you to read through, make your own independent judgments about the competency level, the motivation level of the person described, and then what you believe to be the appropriate leadership style. There are sometimes some extenuating circumstances that might call upon us to slightly adjust our leadership style. But given what you've learned, go ahead and look at these actual circumstances and make your independent judgments, and then we'll go through these as well, all right? So I'll give you about 10, 15 minutes to work through these 7 case studies. It hopefully will be fairly self-evident, but if any questions arise, also be thinking about strategies. What would you do in a circumstance like this? How would you approach this person? What might be a means or a way of improving their motivation level if motivation is in decline? So give some thought to it. Let's begin to apply some of this to more modern kinds of situations. So about 10 minutes. Okay, another minute or two. Make your selections. Okay, before we begin to look at these case studies, let me plant the seed in your minds. I'm always looking for other cases. So you all represent people who have lived and breathed being led and leading. And perhaps you can provide at some point some insights about what worked well or not so well with people you were called upon to lead. Or you as a follower when you felt disenfranchised or demotivated by leaders. I'll share with you an experience I had. I've been a consultant for many, many years, but back in 2008, Kindred Healthcare, one of the largest post-acute healthcare companies in the world, at the time that I joined them, about 46,000 employees, and it grew in the 7 years I was with them to over 68,000 employees across the country. They pretty much had not done anything around leadership development. So they knew me, some of the people there knew me, and asked if I would set aside my consulting practice and come work for them and groom and develop leaders for the organization. So I was happy to do so, but before I did that, I wanted to get a good handle on who my boss would be. And I felt myself to be competent about leadership development. I felt myself to be energized, motivated to help an organization, and that meant that I needed, if I was going to thrive, I needed somebody who would let me go. Somebody who would trust me to do the right thing. High competence and high motivation on my part. I felt like I needed to be managed or led via a laissez-faire approach. And I was happy in the interviews to have serious conversations with the woman who was going to be my boss, and she concurred, she agreed, and in fact, it became the reality. I joined Kindred Healthcare, and I was the Senior Director of Leadership and Organizational Development, and she gave me access to the CEO, the COO, all the senior VPs. I would have meetings with them. She never felt threatened by that, even though she was an SVP of HR. But she gave me carte blanche. And I produced a lot of work for them, generated a lot of systems, programs, initiatives to help groom future hospital CEOs, skilled nursing facility leaders and directors. Did a lot of training of chief clinical officers, nurses, chief clinical officers, people in high levels of management and supervision, and she gave me pretty much a blank page. The resources were there, the direction I would set. She trusted me to do the right thing. And then she retired. And a new person was brought into that role who, the best way I can describe it, was an autocrat. Micromanaged, my way or the highway. No longer did I have access to senior level management. And that's when I said, I'm out of here. So I left in 2013 and resurrected my consulting practice. And it was a living case study of how somebody can thrive when they're being led appropriately and how they can easily become demotivated if they're not. And so if we're raising children, if we're leading a flock of believers in a congregation, if we're a teacher in a class, how we lead can either help people to thrive or it can disenchant them, it can diminish their effectiveness. And serious, I think, idea. And that's, these case studies are beginning to try to help us get a little closer to our own lives and our own existence, and how well do I manage, how well do I lead, what kind of follower am I, and what leadership style do I need in order to thrive, as I'm sure leaders in this congregation would hope that you do. And so that's why I want to get a little bit closer to home with these case studies, but I'm always open to additional cases to kind of make these materials even better for people like you and other congregations, that I can share some of those insights. So let's go ahead and let's turn our attention to case number 1, Mike Kaiser. And I'll be interested in your judgment, your assessment of his competency and motivation, and what may have been the best or the ideal leadership style to be employed with him. So Mike Kaiser, competency level. Okay, I see somebody in the back pointing down. I've heard mediums, I'm hearing highs. All right, how long has he been a Christian? 2 years. Okay, now that was a little cue. Can somebody be entirely competent on the Word in 2 years? Well, it may depend on the person, but I'm thinking probably not. Yeah, which leads us to, okay, competent in what area? Competent to teach Philippians. So what experience does he have in teaching a class, a Bible class? He's done a couple of 5-minute devotions, right? How motivated is he? Very. I mean, he and his wife are on fire. And so can you even envision a scenario where somebody, an elder, maybe there aren't elders in the congregation, but somebody says, hey, I'd like you to teach this class. Because he's highly motivated, what's his likely response? Okay, but he may be getting in over his head, right? This is a situation I would view, in putting this together, I view Mike's competence as low in teaching Philippians. Now, I would make it even lower if they asked him to teach Revelation. Philippians is a little bit gentler book, epistle for somebody to teach, all right? Revelation, you know, I'm always have a little trepidation when I'm asked to teach Revelation. But I would say his competence, I would still probably judge it to be low. Now, there may be some difference in opinion. This is a judgment call. Some might say, well, it's more medium. That's fine. How would you assess his motivation? I think there was uniformity of agreement that it's high. He is on fire. He's doing kingdom work. What kind of follower is he? Well, I tend to view him as a novice in teaching a Bible class. Is there a skill set different for teaching a Bible class than simply knowing Philippians and reading Philippians? Yeah, there are skills involved, and he may not have those skills. And so the leadership style that I think is probably appropriate here would be instructive. And a solution to this might be to co-teach. Maybe better would be for the elder to co-teach with Mike as a means of making sure he doesn't crash and burn. In fact, here's a problem. What if we went ahead and asked him to teach Philippians, and in his judgment it was a failure? He crashed and burned. What would happen to his motivation? He may never want to teach again. So I'm of the judgment that he needs instruction, he needs coaching, mentoring, guidance, but clearly we don't want to hold him back if he's ready to go, but we don't want to turn him loose prematurely either. Does that make sense? And keep in mind, you know, we might think by looking at this model that it's kind of a pretty straightforward model and just plug in the numbers and there you go. Well, you still have to employ judgment here and think through what's going on. So perhaps co-teaching with an experienced teacher would be the way to go. Now, I'll share with you an example of this from a congregation that I know of that had a preacher training program. And here came a young man, a young married man and his wife to come into a preacher training program in a congregation. He had never preached before in his life, and sure enough, they asked him to teach a class on Revelation. I'm sorry, that's a mistake. That is a mistake. Now, he did it, and I'm grateful that he didn't decide preaching's not for me or teaching's not for me, but that could have very easily have happened. And so there's the danger. You got to find this balancing act between letting people go too soon or holding them back too long. And that takes wisdom. That takes wisdom. All right? Any other comments anybody want to make about Mike Kaiser? I think that one's somewhat straightforward. But again, if you just watch, you can kind of get a handle on, are we leading this person appropriately given their level of competence and their level of motivation? I mentioned this earlier. Everybody in this room, every adult in this room, you have a default leadership style. Of the 5 that I've mentioned, you probably tend to gravitate to one over the other. That will serve you well sometimes, but not all the time. And so versatility, this is a thing called situational leadership. I alter and adjust my leadership style depending upon the situation and the person I'm attempting to lead. And that's why situational leadership has really become much in vogue in most organizations. I can't simply choose to have a certain style of leadership and employ it in every circumstance or situation. If I do that, I'm probably going to demotivate a good number of my followers. Okay, any comments on case 1? Pretty straightforward? Okay, case 2, Ava Johnson. Ever observed somebody like this in a congregation? Ever seen somebody who, or perhaps earlier in your acquaintance with them, they were going to visit people who were shut-ins, they were taking classes and teaching classes and energized, and then for some reason, almost sometimes like a light switch, they shut down. So how would you assess Ava's competence? Her competence is high, but her motivation is low, all right? And the kind of follower that she is an alienated follower. Sometimes the challenge is to find out what alienated you. It could be something that somebody said to her. Sometimes acquaintances of her, just like Joan here in this case, wants to sit down and find out what happened. You used to be so energized and helpful in the kingdom, and now for some reason you're not. And maybe she would be willing to share some of that insight. But you're losing access in a case like this to somebody who has a great amount to offer to a congregation. And by being demotivated, that is not being offered. And so to be on kind of a journey to find out why. And so in this particular case, persuasive. This is where you use all of your best motivational factors. Nobody knows the Bible as good as you. I've always been so impressed by the comments you've made in class, the classes you've taught. So you're trying to encourage and build that level of enthusiasm so that you can help her level of motivation to increase, because as we noted over time, the competency may drop off as well. Okay, yes?
There could be a lot of external factors.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, there can be, I mean, age can be a factor. Health issues can be a factor. Problems in her extended family can be a factor. I mean, you stop and think about it. You don't feel like being an energized Christian when there are challenges and stressors going on in your life. So as members of a flock, you know, we are to comfort one another. We need to be on the lookout for people that life is beating up and try to be there to help bolster them. So when you begin to observe something like this happening, it should raise red flags, and you want to be there to find out and to help in order to improve, in this particular case, is Ava's level of motivation. When I do corporate work, you know, there's stories I tell, and I've experienced these. You have somebody who's a coder in software, and they code better than anybody else. They do more lines of code with a high degree of excellence than anybody else, and all of a sudden you see this decline. And in one particular case I read about, it was because she was developing arthritis in her hands. Well, there's a physical malady that's preventing her from producing at a higher level. So we got to be on a journey of investigation to try to help and uncover the causes of some of the reasons that people may be demotivated. And so this is a case where we want to just sit with Ava and persuade her that she's got a lot yet to offer. Sometimes people who get up in years think they don't have much to offer. That's a mistake. I'll make this one point as well. One of those non-controllable factors that give a person influence or don't give a person influence is age. When you're young, very young, how much influence do you have? Not much. And then what happens is it begins to go up. And in our country, when you reach a certain age, what happens to your influence? Begins to go down again. We in our particular culture, we have a tendency to no longer listen to the aged. In Oriental countries, Asian countries, that continues to go up. You are granted more influence by the sheer number of years that you have lived, and I think there's scriptural proof that that's the way we're supposed to operate as well. That the elderly amongst us are deserving of our respect and insight, that we honor them because they have a lot to share. And yet culturally we have a tendency to begin to diminish the influence that those people can bring. And I don't think that's a cultural influence that we need to have impacting a congregation. As I look out over the group, there are people who are older. The number of people who are older than me keep getting smaller. But there is something for them to bring, and there is value. And they need to know that. Ava's may be simply, nobody listens to me anymore. I've lost my purpose in life. Well, that's something that we can help to overcome by helping them to look at the value they bring to the game. All right, anybody else on case 2? All right, case 3. Case 3, we've got Rebecca Warren. How did you assess Rebecca's competence? Okay. I believe it's high. Some people have suggested, well, you know, it's a moving target. She's not fully an adult yet, but given all of her responsibilities, all of the things she's doing without complaint, I tend to see her as being pretty much up there. Her level of motivation? Kind of follower? I think she is a capable to mature follower. And I think that I would, in my case, you know, my default is laissez-faire. I'd be more willing to grant her latitude. I would trust her. She has proven herself. Now, just play back in your own minds. You know, think about your own childhood, growing up. How much latitude, how much freedom, how much trusting occurred in your own family? Did you ever have that clash between you and your parents where you felt like you should be given more freedom and autonomy, and they kept holding you back? This is a pretty common challenge that exists in homes. And that's why I would suggest this. Here's a little bit of technique or a tool. If you've got teenagers living in your family and you're trying to manage and lead them, sometimes you can take this model and use it as a discussion point. As you show greater and greater competence, and as you continue to be motivated to carry your weight around the house, I will begin to grant you greater and greater autonomy and freedom, and I will trust you more and more. It's a very interesting way to have a dialogue with somebody about why you lead them the way you lead them. You know, otherwise it just becomes you're not giving me enough freedom. Yes, I am. You can't, but if you sit down, you can kind of use the model. Let's talk about your competence. Let's talk about your motivation. From my perspective, here's what it is. And you know what? The reward for higher competency and higher motivation, I'm going to let you go. Now they have something to aspire to. So you can use this, and I've told managers and leaders of organizations, sit with your employees when you're doing performance reviews. Use the model to help them know how you view them and how they can come to the place where you are not checking up on them because you don't feel like you have to anymore. And it can be a very, very powerful tool and mechanism for improving communication. What might happen if Rebecca's father was too controlling? Absolutely not. Ever seen that amongst fathers? Ever heard of that in families? Where there is this kind of hold them down, no freedom. And there's a trend, unfortunately, that happens if you've got autocratic fathers in a household. What happens to the children when they are of old enough in age to leave? They leave, and sometimes they abandon the faith. This is one of those life lessons that we need to learn, is to begin to let go. And really what's happening when we're leading somebody, and through our leadership, their competency is growing and their motivation is growing, we're getting to the point that they become self-leading. They don't even need me anymore. And that's really what we should aspire to with our children that grow up in our household, the children that we're teaching in Bible classes, the sheep that we're shepherding, is that we want to, that's servant leadership, where we give them the tools to be highly competent, highly motivated, so they're on their own and they're going to produce, they're going to be highly motivated and competent people in the kingdom. So that's why this one, this gets close to home with a lot of fathers sometimes whom I've heard are way too controlling of their children, who deserve better because of their competency and motivation. All right, Larry Jeffers. This is one of those kind of, depends on what we're talking about here. How would you assess Larry's competence? Okay. High in what?
Based on reputation, at least.
Okay, he knows his Bible, obviously. Clearly, he has a deep, deep insight about the Word of God. How would you assess his competency in knowing the members of the flock? This is one of those dilemma situations, because his competency is high and low. It's high in understanding the Word. It's low in knowing the members of the church and the challenges that they're confronting and the needs that they have. And so his motivation is high, but here's the dilemma that we sometimes confront. In a situation like this person comes in and doesn't want to be overly managed or led by the eldership, but they're feeling like we've got to give greater insight about the lessons to be taught, the Bible classes that we're going to engage in, so that they have and develop a greater competency about the sheep. And I could see where somebody gets on their high horse and say, why are you telling me what to preach? I've been preaching for 20 years. I'm telling you because you don't know the people here. And when you get to know the people here, then I will give you the latitude and the freedom to make those kinds of choices. And so you can see where a potential conflict could arise. Again, the model can help you explain why. In this case, he's a mature follower, but he needs a more participative style. That means let's sit down and discuss the theme or the lessons and have a dialogue about that, a sharing of that, because frankly, you don't know what we know as elders of the flock. Okay. Oh, yeah. Right, and I wouldn't even, if there were elders here, I'd still say don't pull out the formal influence card, because what does that tend to do to the relationship? Whenever you resort to, even in word or at least in expression, or it's conveyed, do it because I'm the boss, do it because I'm the elder, do it because I'm your father, I think you've lost some ground. Because then they might comply. But that's different than internalizing the rightness of the direction you're trying to set. Okay, a little personal insight. I have been an elder. It's dangerous. To be given formal authority is dangerous. Formal influence is dangerous because it's too easy to use. I have a dominant personality anyway, okay? All those personality style things, I come out as a driver, as dominance. I mean, I'm a my way or the highway kind of guy generally. Give me power, and I'm dangerous. And I'll just be real upfront here. Early as a husband, too often I just laid down the law when in discussion with my wife or disagreements would arise. I would simply follow the easy route and say, be in subjection. That is wrong. That is wrong. And we have a case study coming up about that. Know yourself. Know your inclinations. There are times when formal influence has to be used. I will grant that, but be guarded about using it. As a parent, you're going to have to use it sometimes, but try to convince. Try to paint a picture. Try to tell a story. Try to help the person to internalize why the direction you're giving is the appropriate one so it becomes their own. It takes longer, it takes more time, but I'm telling you, it has long-lasting positive effects. So, that's one of the things when you're a young husband or new to the eldership or a new boss in an organization, sometimes that power goes to your head. Be careful, be careful. The very thing, and I would often speak to this in businesses, the very thing that gets somebody promoted into a supervisory role typically is because they have already been great informal influencers. They're already good at convincing people because they have no power. Convincing people of the direction that they think we should go in, and everybody goes, that's really smart, you really did that well. And so what do? We reward them to the position of supervisor, and I've seen it happen where it goes to their head. And they now crack the whip and employ their formal authority rather than doing what made them successful in the first place. So be wary of formal authority. And in this case, he's highly competent, motivated, but he doesn't know the congregation. Instruction would be helpful to learn more about them. That's my take on this scenario. Every case is different. And you got to get to know people, and you got to understand how you lead is going to dramatically impact them. Case 5. This is kind of along the lines of what I was just mentioning. Typical problem that arises in a young family, arguments over finances. How would you assess Gloria's level of competence?
as it relates to finances. High. How would you relate her motivation? You think she has an interest in the welfare of the family? She's wanting to make sure we don't find ourselves in dire straits or circumstances, right? I would say it's high. What kind of follower is she? She's mature. What leadership style would she thrive under? Now, in finances, we might want to make it participative because both the husband and the wife are joint in this effort. But she is clearly highly competent, highly motivated. And in this particular case where he suddenly bursts out, "You're supposed to obey me," pulling out the wives be in subjection to your husband card is the wrong thing to do. Should a husband ever resort to an autocratic style with his wife? That's open for discussion.
Well, based on your model.
If they have low competency and low motivation?
Yeah.
I guess. I don't know that I've ever seen it. I've seen husbands use an autocratic style when that is not the case with the wife. She's highly competent, highly motivated. And what effect does it have on her? A terrible effect. It is not Christ leadership. Yes?
Now is that it's the wife's job to put herself in submission, not the husband's job to put her in.
Okay, that's a very, very interesting take. It's the wife's job to be in submission, not the husband's wife to put her in submission. And quite frankly, you look in those passages, we are supposed to be in subjection to our wives too. We tend to overemphasize one to the negation of the other. Servant leadership would say we don't employ this autocratic behavior unless somebody is truly lacking competence and lacking motivation. And frankly, when I have had discussions with husbands and wives and their marriage is falling apart, the wife has high competence and high motivation, the husband has become a dictator. And I'm telling you, that happens all too frequently. That is not Christ leadership. It's not Christ leadership. So it's an important thing to understand here. All right, I saw a hand. Were there questions or other comments? But yes.
No, I was just going to say, and sometimes we forget, we didn't create the rule in our house. God gave us the purpose, and if we're doing it the wrong way, like you were suggesting, we're not serving the purpose that God gave us.
Right, right. Yeah, we're missing the calling that he's given us. And that's why, again, I would say those of you who hold positions of leadership, fathers, elders, supervisors, managers, be careful, be careful. It's too easy to pull the authority card. And you're just not going to get the kind of outcomes that you're looking for in that situation. It's fast, but it doesn't have very, very good outcomes. All right, the Oak Street congregation, again, we're looking at a group at large. Of competence. High, okay. And any congregation, as we met it earlier, probably going to have all the way across the continuum, but generally speaking, it seems to be a very, very competent group of people. How would you assess their level of motivation? Thriving, energized, high. Again, there could be outliers, people who don't have that level of almost in every congregation. You're going to find people at the low end of these. The kind of followers, there are all kinds of followers. What would be the appropriate leadership style? I'm going to say participative. Now, Dave was already telling me that, you've come up with a theme. I hope that was a collective effort. I'll say that. I have the advantage of coming to a congregation, or I don't know what's going on here. So I can just tell you from my perspective. I know of congregations in my history where at the first of the year, the elders would say, here's our theme for the year, here's our goals and objectives. And my response was, Shouldn't I have been a part of that? Because it seems very, very autocratic to simply tell people, here's what we're going to do this year. And I've fallen victim to that myself. Sometimes in your best interests, you do things in a vacuum and you don't involve the people who have to make it a reality. I'll give you another example of this very same thing. A different congregation. The elders were concerned because the hour-long service was extending too long beyond an hour. I was a member of this congregation, and I was a song leader in this congregation. And so one day there was an announcement, what I call an edict. Song leaders, only 5 songs. And I overheard a conversation where one of the other song leaders walked up to one of the elders and said, you know, sometimes I like to have a theme in my songs. Would it be okay if I only sung a verse or 2 of a song so I could have a couple more songs? And the response was, 5 songs is 5 songs. Here's a leader, a song leader in the congregation, highly competent, highly motivated, who's being told what to do. And walked away wounded from it. Now, I know what's going on in a situation like that. The elders have uncovered a problem that they want to solve. But I think the mistake they made was they solved it in a vacuum. The problem was one of our worship periods are going too long. People are complaining about worship. That's the problem. They should have gone to the song leaders and others who were involved in the worship and said, here's a problem we're hearing. Do you have suggestions or ideas for how we could resolve that? They may have come to the conclusion, let's limit our number of songs, but then it's theirs. And not something that's simply being told them to do. The motivation and the heart of the elders was all good. They were trying to solve a problem. But I often tell managers and leaders this now. Your job is not to be a problem solver, it's to be a problem identifier. And then with your highly competent and motivated people around you, find a solution. I'll repeat that. Leaders, identify problems to be solved, but be careful about solving them on your own without the participation of the people who are going to be impacted. Because to have somebody tell you this is the way it is and no discussion, demotivates. But when people can be engaged, this is what happened in Acts chapter 15, where they gathered together and competent and motivated people in a participative way resolved the dilemma of the issue around circumcision. So I'm sharing with you and I'm sharing with congregations, the reason I'm doing this is that I have observed too many times where the mantle of authority is employed in a way that it shouldn't be. Now, by the way, when elders of a congregation say, here are our goals or is our theme, they might say at the beginning of the year, we're going to have a meeting about this. Those who are interested come. You know what will happen? The highly competent, highly motivated people will be there. The ones who aren't probably won't. You're not going to get 100% participation. But the people who really care about having a say in the direction are going to be present, and now it becomes owned, shared, arrived at participatively. And I think there's great value in that. 7, Greg. Anybody ever had a student like this in Bible class? Competence, low. Motivation, low. Kind of follower, apathetic. Leadership style, autocratic. This is what you're going to do. This is when you're going to do it. And I'll be very, very pleased if you do this, but if you don't, there are going to be some repercussions. These people can undermine a class Have you ever seen that happen? Where the ringleader, low competence, low motivation, undermines the effectiveness of the class. I'm not shy about, in circumstances like this, that after I uncover what's going on, and I see it repeated, make sure that I'm assessing this correctly, I welcome them to leave, or I encourage them to leave. Go sit in the auditorium. Really, people who have low competence and low motivation will take you hostage if you let them. Be careful before you make the assessment prematurely that they have low competence and low motivation. There could be other factors at work. But sometimes you've got to first try to improve his performance, and then barring that, then there has to be some kind of consequence. Another corporate day-long session I do is on performance management, and I have one called Analyzing Performance Problems. How to analyze and solve performance problems. And I've thought about bringing that into the church too, because it's the same thing. You know, the two things, all performance problems are one of two types. Competence issues, people don't know how to perform. Motivation issues, they don't want to perform. It's the same idea. All right, case 8, you don't have this in your book. Any real life examples you can share where you didn't use the best leadership style, or when someone leading you used the wrong style? Is this resonating with any of you? Have any of you going, that happened to me? I remember when. I've got too many scars. I've been through it. I've been a leader, and I've not used the right leadership style. I've been a follower who has had the wrong style used with me. There's some of my painful memories. Anybody else in that boat? Anybody think of any of those? Yes.
Freshman, my parents had a small business that I helped out in. I applied for and started working at another business which had some long-term prospect along with my degree, but through that I decided that it was not beneficial, it was not the kind of work environment, motivational, a good place for me to be as far as my mind and just work ethic or whatever. My parents were dead set against me quitting, and so a couple conversations through that, but what my dad finally explained to me was their small business could not afford to not work, and I was going to have lots of expenses, so I needed to use this other outside thing. So definitely understanding that reasoning and not fighting it was a good example.
Okay, so when you understood the reasoning, the rationale,
Much better than simply having you told this is what you're going to do. Be careful of this is the way or the highway.
So I was very motivated to make it work.
okay, because now you saw the impact it had on the family. This is internalizing. This is being instructed. Takes more time, takes more energy, but boy, the payoff is there. All right, good. All right,
I'll pose this to you. We're gonna run out of time here in just a few minutes. I want to do this on your own, but on page 29, the heading "Aspiring to Lead," how would you rate your level of competence? I mean, we're talking about you now, and you don't have to fill this out here. And obviously, it depends on the venue we're talking about, but let's stay in biblical terms. How would you rate your competence biblically, understanding Scripture? Think about it. Don't put a check mark. There's people sitting next to you that might disagree. How would you rate your motivation? How motivated are you to serve in the kingdom? How enthusiastic are you for what the Word has to share with the world? This is a kind of introspection that we need to do sometimes. And, then you can decide, what kind of follower am I? Am I a capable follower? Am I a mature follower? Am I a novice follower? You may be getting some insight then about the way you're being led. Maybe the elders here are already kind of an intuitive sense about where you are and therefore how best to lead you. And so you can do that. If you say my competency is medium and my motivation is high, you can simply plot the intersection, and it tells you then that you're a capable follower. And I have a couple of questions here we'll do very quickly. What type of follower might be better qualified for the work of an elder, assuming he already possesses the qualifications revealed in Scripture? What kind of follower should we be interested in being an elder? Mature. I mean, does that not go without saying? Don't you want to have somebody who is highly competent and highly motivated? And then the secondary question there is, how should a man's leadership at home prepare him for shepherding a church? Highly competent, highly motivated. I don't know what the case is here. But you know what my observation is? The most competent and motivated people in most households these days in the church is the wife and not the husband. There is a crisis of male spiritual leadership. It shouldn't be that way. We have been given the charge as husbands and as fathers to be the spiritual leaders. And yet, in too many congregations, I see the wife has eclipsed the husband in that regard. It is not in God's plan. And you know what happens when a wife eclipses the husband in motivation and in competency? The husband gets threatened and he imposes formal influence. Shouldn't be that way. So again, introspection is all I ask, because I don't know the circumstance in your house and in your family, but if you want to be a leader, you need to grow in your knowledge and understanding of the word and your zeal and enthusiasm for what its message is. Should women be leaders in local congregations? You know, we go round and round about this. You know, Paul is pretty upfront about it. A woman is not to teach or exercise authority over a man. You know what he's saying? Formal influence. But a woman can be a leader informally. And is. Aquila and Priscilla is a perfect example. And in our congregation, I'm sure in your congregation, there are women who are shining lights, highly competent, highly motivated. And based on our now definition of leadership, they're great informal influencers. And I don't think Paul ever intended for them not to be influential. Priscilla was influential with Apollos. He was curbing the role for formal leadership for males, but that doesn't mean women cannot be leaders. But they're leaders informally. Does that make sense? To me, that helped to understand that passage that has given us heartache for so many years, because we have too many examples of influential women in Scripture for us to say women should never be leaders. They're not supposed to be formal leaders with formal authority. But I think I see leaders all the time in the women in congregations. All right, one last thing and we'll call it a day. On page 30, follower mapping. If you're parents, you could map your immediate or extended family members, including yourself. Singles, you could map your extended family or your circle of church friends, including yourself. But this is a place where what you can do is you can actually map where followers around you are. So these are just initials of the people I know in my life and where I see them in terms of their competency and motivation. It gives me some insight. I've often suggested, elders might sit down and simply map the congregation from a biblical perspective in terms of competency and motivation. Where are the flock? Parents can do it with extended family, with your kids. Where am I? Where are they? How should I lead? How can I adjust the way I lead so I can be more effective in bringing them to a place of being highly competent and highly motivated? That's where we want to bring everybody to. Highly competent, highly motivated in the kingdom. So that's there if you choose to employ it. By all means, please do so. And then just to alert you to this, on pages 31 through 36 are detailed descriptions of each of the 5 leadership styles, giving you insight about how you lead like that, and biblical examples of it in play. So the idea here is, if you're thinking through, you go, I need to be a bit more instructive with this person because they're highly motivated, but they don't have the competency, you can turn and read how to be an instructive leader, how to coach, how to mentor, what to do, strategies to employ in order to be a more instructive leader. The best leaders not only have high levels of competence and motivation, but they're also versatile. They can be the type of leader they need to be dependent upon the follower they're attempting to influence. So that's a resource there at the back of the guide that may be of help to you in your journey to be a more effective leader. Covered a lot. That's the 4-hour workshop. Setting goals, being clear about purpose, how crucial that is to effective leadership. And then looking at influencing and how we can influence and how we can lead and the type of different followers and leaders that we need to be. Any questions I'd be happy to entertain. You're welcome to shoot me an email. You can get that from Dave if questions arise or anything you'd like to ask me offline, that's fine. I'd be happy to respond to those as well. Let me kind of end here. What a good leader he is. Thank you so much for your kind attention and time. I hope it's been helpful. Thank you. Dave?
Okay, before we're dismissed, I just want to say thank you so much. So many top takeaways, I could probably ramble on for an hour, but it's been humbling. So many things for us to think about going forward. The discussions have already taken place, but thank all of you for coming and participating and investing your time in this. You're a family that's working for the same goal, the same purpose, and it takes all of us to encourage each other, and just very grateful for all of you and your desire to do God, to know God's will, to do God's will, and to encourage each other. It's encouraging to me. This has been a humbling weekend, but very, very productive. And I'm looking forward to what lies ahead as we discuss this more. This has all been videotaped and streaming. It will be saved. It will be available. Thank you for everyone online that's participated. Matt has other things that he's been involved in. You can find him online also, and we'll be keeping up with Matt. Safe journey home. Everything's well there, and we hope you come back sometime. Spend some time with us. Looking forward to that. That's all I got right now. Thank you all again. Mike's going to come now. Lead us in a closing prayer.
Let's pray. Our Father, we come to you this time. We are so